Now let me tell you, I absolutely love the horror film genre. You can either have a movie that's really good or a movie that's so bad that ends up really fun to watch anyway. But the best thing I love about the horror film genre, there are so many iconic characters. You have Freddy Krueger, you have Jason, Pinhead, Michael Myers, Leatherface. But from Japan you have one character that's just as famous, and that is Sadako from the iconic Ring series. Now Sadako and the Ring series are trendsetters in the horror genre. The Ring basically made the Japanese horror genre a thing to the West. It set off this rage in Hollywood, remaking every single Asian film left and right, whether they be good or bad. Now Sadako and the Ring series, they're very similar to our iconic horror film franchises that we have in the West. They start off with a bang, get really popular at first, then they started making more films in the series, and the more movies they make, the more the quality just kind of decreases. So now when they make a Ring movie or a Sadako movie, you just go just for the laughs. You don't really go to genuinely be scared. But it wasn't all laughs in the beginning. The movies genuinely freak you the hell out. Now coming soon to the theaters here in Japan is kind of the long-awaited fight between Sadako and Kayako. But you know we can't expect an honest horror movie. I mean, we've all lived through Freddy vs. Jason, right? But before Sadako vs. Kayako comes out, let's take a look back at the Ring series and discuss the ups and downs of this legendary franchise. Hello YouTube, my name is Ray from Asian Filmist, and I'm just a guy who loves movies. Now let's point out, like many of the movies I talk about, the films in the Ring series are actually adaptations, but not of comics, of books. And like many of the adaptations I've watched, I've never actually read the original source. But like I always said, you're supposed to enjoy these adaptations for what they are. Now let's start with this review of the Ring series by starting off with the first movie, Ring. It was originally released in 1998 and was directed by Nakata Hideo. It stars a bunch of recognizable names for fans of Japanese cinema. The cast is led by Matsushima Nanako and Sanada Hiroyuki. And it stars Ino Rie in her legendary portrayal as the famous Sadako. Now this is the movie that started off. It's the trendsetter. This is the movie that made the world scared of ghost girls with hair draped over their faces. And even by today's horror movie standards, the movie is still quite terrifying. The story is revolved around a cursed videotape, and it is said that whoever watches the tape will die exactly 1 week after viewing it. This video kills 4 teenagers, and a relative of one of the teenagers, played by Matsushita Nanako, recruits the help of her ex-husband, played by Sanada Hiroyuki. Investigating the tape, they learn about the mysterious Sadako. Sadako was a young girl with psychic powers, and she was reviled by everyone around her. This led her to be killed by her own father and thrown down a well. So they learn that whoever watches this video dies by the hands of this mysterious psychic. Next, let's talk about what was great about the first Ring movie. Now what made this first Ring movie great was its use of eerie atmosphere and inescapable dread, as opposed to gory visuals and jump scares as what you would typically find in horror movies. The atmosphere building was so well done that when they finally revealed Sadako at the very end, it was absolutely terrifying. Well, terrifying at the time. If you watch it nowadays, you might not be so scared. But in addition to Sadako, it had very well fleshed out characters. You get connected with these characters, you got to like them, and ultimately you don't want them to fall victim to Sadako's curse. And even though Sadako herself was only in the film for a brief moment, it was enough to ingrain that image into everyone's mind for years to come. Now some bad points. Admittedly, the movie was slow at times. Understandably, the movie wanted to create this dreadful and eerie atmosphere, but in doing so kind of slowed down the pace a lot. The only other thing I had against this movie was its random plot device. As the story went along, it is revealed that the two main characters, well, more particularly the main guy, randomly has psychic powers, in that he can read the mind of any one person he touches. This was used to essentially tell more background on Sadako and all the suffering she went through before she was killed. But the reveal felt kind of random and kind of forced, but it wasn't so bad that it took away from the rest of the movie. Overall, the first Ring movie was excellent and is definitely the best out of the entire Ring series. Like I said, it was a trendsetter and it got the world scared of the Onryo, or the spirit fueled by vengeance out to kill anyone and everyone in its path. Basically, the Onryo was used in many Japanese horror films that came after the Ring. Basically, every one of these ghosts look exactly like Sadako. That's just how influential she was. Next up in this list is a sequel to the Ring called Rasen. Rasen was released at the exact same time that the original Ring movie was. The studio for some reason thought that they can double the revenue by releasing both movies at the same time. They didn't really think that releasing 2 movies at the same time would divide their audience. And ultimately, the Ring became more of a hit, whereas Rasen was kind of forgotten. Basically, no one really liked it, and for good reason too. Though released at the same time, time as the original Ring, it was directed by a different guy. It was directed by Ida Joji, and it stars Sato Koichi and Nakatani Miki. Nakatani Miki plays the same character in Rasen as she does in the first Ring movie. In fact, many actors and characters from Ring appear in Rasen as well, including Sanada Hiroyuki, reprising his role as Takayama. In Rasen, Takayama is found dead, and we get introduced to this new character, Ando Mitsuo, played by Sato Koichi. And he plays his medical examiner, and he's been put in charge to find out why and how Takayama died. As he's examining Takayama's body, he finds this weird cryptic note, supposedly written by Takayama. Upon investigating this mysterious note, he stumbles upon the rumor of this cursed videotape. He manages to get a hold of a copy and then watches it himself. He learns about Sadako and Sadako's curse and then decides he's going to be the last victim of this curse. So he vows to destroy every single copy of this video before his 7 days are up. Ando partners up with Takano Mai, who is a student and supposed lover of Takayama. Together the two, along with the story of the film, go down this downward spiral fitting for the name of this movie. Rasen means spiral in Japanese. Let's start off with the goods of this movie. First of all the characters from the first movie that appear in this movie are all the original actors reprising the roles. Well, that is except Sadako, but we'll get into that later. Next, you have not many, but you have some beautiful and arguably artistic shots. But that's all I have to say about the goods of this movie. Let's dive into the bads now. Now, this movie is supposed to be a horror movie, and you get some creepy moments, but overall the movie is not scary. What made the first movie stuck out, as mentioned earlier, is the feeling of dread. But in Rasen, it's not dread you feel in the mood. It's just depression. Everything is just depressing. Ando, the main character, is suicidal because he feels guilty over the loss of his son, and he's constantly trying to find ways to end his life. Also, most of the dialogue spoken by him to Mai is just about his sadness, about his depression, not necessarily about his fears, further taking away from the horror atmosphere. Another bad thing about this movie is its forgotten plot points. Koichi vows before he dies he's going to find every single last copy of the video and destroy them all. But when he miraculously lives past the 7 days, that plot point is all but thrown away. Oh yeah, and we also have plot points to make the flow of the story more convenient. In this story, Mai randomly has psychic powers too, just like the two main characters in the first movie did. Now, Mai's psychic powers were kind of used to help build the relationship between her and Ando. But there's another purpose for this convenient plot device, and that is to justify them changing the rules of Sadako's curse. Yeah, the whole watching the video in 7 days and then you die thing that the first movie established, yeah, that's gone. In the first movie, it was established that if you make a copy of the video and show it to another person, you can be cured from this curse. However, they changed the rules of that curse in this movie, for better or worse. They changed the rules of the curse a little bit so that if you watch the video, you actually get infected with this virus created by Sadako. And to actually have the curse lifted, you didn't have to copy the video. You actually just had to be helper to Sadako and help spread the virus. Ando obviously survived, so he must have helped Sadako in some way. And he helps Sadako unknowingly because he and Mai hook up. They have pity sex after he opens up to her about his feelings of depression about losing his son. And of course that wouldn't have been made possible unless it weren't for Mai's convenient psychic abilities. Now with Ando and Mai hooking up, that effectively passes on the virus like it was some kind of STD, which is one of the upgrades of this virus, or call it a mutation if you will. But that leads to another thing that was kind of iffy about this movie. There's a lot more sex than needed. Hell, the first time you meet Sadako on screen, she comes out of the TV all naked and tries to seduce Ando. So essentially they changed Sadako from being this angry, vengeful ghost to this seductive spirit, which the plot kind of reveals her to be this some sort of hive queen, and that she's trying to infect the world with her virus. Now I guess that plot point originally follows what was originally written in the novels. However, it wasn't really well represented in the film. Overall, Rasen was a mess, and all of the actions by the characters from the first Ring movie were really inconsistent. But that's what happens when you have two different teams working on both films. Basically, I'd say Rasen was probably the weakest out of all the Ring movies. Next up in this list, we have Ring 2, which was released in 1999, the year after the first two Ring movies came out. They brought back director Nakata Hideo and basically just forgot all the events that transpired in Rasen. Essentially, you have an alternate storyline or alternate universe. This movie brings back most of the actors of the first Ring movie, including Matsushima Nanako and Sanada Hiroyuki. Even Ino Rie, who played Sadako in the first Ring movie, comes back to play Sadako in this one. And while Ring and Rasen were adaptations of the first two novels of the original book series, Ring 2 is a completely original story, and it was crafted so that way it felt more closely like the original Ring movie. So Ring 2 starts off a few hours after the first Ring movie ended. Sadako's body is retrieved from the well, her relative identifies who she was, and then they give her a burial at sea. And in this story, Mai is giving the role of main character. She starts to investigate Takayama's death and also helping to find the whereabouts of Reiko and Yoichi, the mother and son from the first movie. She partners up with one of Reiko's colleagues, and their investigation leads them to a mental hospital where they interview the friend of the first victim. Note that it's the same character and same actress from the very first scene in the first movie. There they meet Dr. Kawajiri, who's kind of like this friendly mad scientist figure. He doesn't believe in the paranormal or the supernatural, but that doesn't stop him from conducting experiments to try to find what the real answer to Sadako's curse is. Eventually, Mai locates Reiko and Yoichi, and together they go on this pseudo-scientific journey of trying to find a way to stop Sadako's curse. Now let's talk about the goods of this movie. First, we have the original director and the original screenwriter returning, as well as the original cast. Second good thing is that they return Sadako to how she was in the first movie. She's no longer a seductive succubus, she is the vengeful ghost that we know and love. And there were a few decent scary moments, definitely a lot more than Rasen had to offer. And as far as good things, that's about it. Now let's talk about the bad things. The first bad thing about this movie is that they tried to add a lot more unnecessary information to make Sadako more creepier. They added that she didn't actually die after being thrown down the well, she was actually alive for 30 years after. They also added that Sadako was birthed by her mother in the ocean. Hence why Sadako's relative felt the need to bury her in the sea. Second, there was a lot of weird pseudoscience they made just for this movie. Though not as much science as they had in Rasen, but still enough to make your head kind of feel, what's going on? Like Dr. Kawajiri figured out that in order to stop Sadako's curse, they had to project her rage into a swimming pool. But above all else, what made this movie suffer is the amount of extra subplots it had going on at the same time. First of all, Mai, as she did in Rasen, she magically has psychic powers, and that helped her along in her investigation of Takayama's death. So that's going on. Then we also have this weird science mumbo jumbo happening at the same time. Dr. Kawajiri is doing experiments with patients. Then we also have Okazaki, who was Reiko's colleague. And we have his story arc with a high school girl who had watched the cursed video and made a copy for Okazaki to watch in hopes that she would be saved from the curse. Then we have Reiko and Yoichi and their life and what they've been doing since the first movie. Then we have this angry police officer who comes in about 2 or 3 times throughout the whole movie looking for Reiko and Yoichi. Oh yeah, Yoichi has psychic powers too, and it's quite strong, almost to the level of Sadako's. And above all the subplots, let's not forget that Sadako's curse is supposed to be the center of this whole entire movie. But overall, Ring 2 was a step above Rasen, but still all over the place, still a mess. But it was definitely more consistent with the first movie as compared to Rasen. Next movie on the list is Ring 0 Birthday. It came out in the year 2000, a year after Ring 2, and it was directed by Tsuruta Norio. This was meant to be the prequel of the entire Ring series, and it was in fact based off of one of the original books. The story takes place 30 years before the events of the first Ring movie, and stars Nakama Yukie as Sadako. Now in the first Ring movies, they briefly mentioned that Sadako was a part of a theater group in Tokyo. This movie delves into that part of Sadako's life. And she's in this theater group for therapy because apparently she sees all these weird dreams, and so her doctor tells her that she could relieve stress by joining this theater group. But after she joins this theater group, strange things start to happen. But of course, in keeping up with the story, the rest of the theater troupe reviles Sadako and kind of outcasts her. So that's the basic story. Let's dive into the goods of this film. First of all, Nakama Yukie is very charismatic in her role as Sadako. She makes you feel very sorry for the character, very sympathetic towards her. And as far as goods, that's about it for this movie. Now for the bads. First of all, this movie, though being part of the Ring series, isn't really a horror movie. Now don't get me wrong, there are many parts that have elements of horror movies, but overall this movie wasn't really scary. In fact, the movie felt more like a cliche melodrama mixed with a little bit of Carrie in there, in the sense that the bully girl snaps and then everyone dies. But the melodrama part is kind of understandable because this is supposed to be before when the actual horror happens. But this melodrama feel overall made this movie, to put it simply, just boring. The story and plot points had some interesting points, but overall it wasn't exactly entertaining. Then there was this weird plot point about Sadako eventually growing to become 2 separate beings, one good and one bad, and then splitting apart. Then good Sadako is brought to where bad Sadako is being kept, and for some reason they merge, and that's when the horror starts to happen. Now admittedly, when the 2 Sadakos join together and the horror starts happening, you start cheering for Sadako. But aside from that, Ring 0 Birthday was very simple, kind of uneventful, and overall not so fun. Next up on our list is Sadako 3D. It was released in 2012, 12 years after Ring Zero Birthday had come out, and it was directed by Hanabusa Tsutomu. Sadako 3D was also loosely based on one of the newer Ring books. This movie stars Ishihara Satomi and also Seto Koji. We also have Hashimoto Ai playing Sadako this time around. Now the story of this film supposedly takes place after Rasen, so essentially means the story of Ring 2 is discounted and we can forget about it. Which is funny because originally Rasen was the story that everyone had forgotten about until Sadako 3D came out. And the reason behind that is because of Seto Koji's character, who is named Ando Takanori. Now if you've seen Rasen, Ando Takanori is the name of the son of the main character. You remember the main character of Rasen was depressed because his son died? Well yeah, that son was Takanori. And spoilers, Sadako revives Takanori at the end of Rasen. But they don't explicitly say that this is the same character as the one in Rasen, so the link between Sadako 3D and Rasen is kind of iffy. But in the books at least, they're the same character. So obviously many of this generation won't even know what a VHS is, and so they have this new cursive video, and it floats around the internet on Nico Nico Dogo, which is basically the Japanese version of YouTube. A guy basically live broadcasts his suicide, but he does so with the intent of reviving the legendary Sadako. It's also revealed that this guy is behind a string of murders of young women. He sews up white dresses for them so that they look like Sadako's white dress, kills them, and then throws them down the well, as if everything was a part of some sort of sick ritual. But anyways, those who watch this video on Nico Nico Doga suddenly experience a horrifying death at the hands of Sadako. Now, Ishihara Satomi is the main character of this film, and she plays a high school teacher by the name of Ayukawa Akane. Now, Akane, one of her students, gets killed because she watches this mysterious cursed video. And just when another student of hers is about to get killed, she jumps in and saves the day. It's at that point that she learns that Sadako has suddenly targeted her so that she can be the vessel for her spirit so that she can fully revive. Sounds intriguing, right? Well, let's cut to the goods. First, Sadako is back in the form we all know and love. She's not a seductive succubus, she's not a hive queen, and she's certainly not a depressed little girl. And as with many of the other Ring movies, that's it for the goods. Now for the bads. Now, as the title of the movie suggests, Sadako 3D, a lot of opportunities are taken so that way Sadako pops out into the viewer's eyes. As a matter of fact, the 3D is really overly abused, and it's made into some kind of cheap and cheesy gimmick. So you kind of expect half the time watching, bah! Oh, story, bah! Story, bah! You get really tired of it quickly. And another bad thing about this movie, you notice this from the start, is that there is a lot of screaming. It's like half of the soundtrack is screaming. And as a matter of fact, the screaming is a central part of the story's plot. Akane, as a matter of fact, as with all the main characters of the Ring series, for some reason has psychic powers. Like she has this kind of banshee scream that breaks all glass or stuns everybody who can hear it. Now screaming is a central part of the plot of Sadako 3D until it no longer is. It's the way that Akane defends herself against Sadako. But at the ending of the movie, that special power is just dropped. It's just completely forgotten about. Another thing that Sadako 3D suffers with is that it forgets what made the original Ring movie great. Rather than being this atmospheric and subtle horror movie, it instead adopts cliche tropes of modern horror movies, like jump scares and loud noises that are hundreds of decibels higher than the volume of the words that the characters are actually saying. And also we have very, very, very mediocre CG. And Sadako 3D over relies on the CG so that we can make its overused 3D effects pop out. And arguably worse than what they did in Rasen and Ring 2, they added so much more to make Sadako much scarier. For some reason, Sadako now has magic scary hair. Guess they're trying to bank on the success of the Ju-on movies. And also butterflies have become this weird symbol of Sadako now. Like, something involving Sadako is going to happen soon if a butterfly floats nearby. But the worst thing that they added to Sadako's arsenal is spider Sadakos. Like, seriously, all those hundreds of women that the guy murdered as part of his ritual to revive Sadako. Yeah, basically Sadako has turned them all into minions. And for about 15 to 20 minutes of the movie's runtime, the movie changes from a Ring movie to an Aliens movie. Basically, Akane is trying to run around in this old abandoned building trying to escape from these spider Sadakos. But it kind of makes no sense because all Akane has to do to defeat one of these spider Sadakos is club him on the head. After one club, they magically turn to butterflies. Or she can just scream, massive splash damage. It's like her area effect spell. It just kills everything around her. But the worst possible thing that Sadako 3D has done to the Ring franchise is the way they portrayed Sadako herself. Now, I mentioned earlier that Sadako is back to her original form. However, they got rid of a lot of the elements that made Sadako such a sympathetic character. They basically made her an empty villain. Just a generic movie monster that the heroes have to run away from or just scream at. Overall, Sadako 3D was one of the weakest films of the Ring franchise. Granted, all of them except for the first Ring movie are really weak, but this one takes the cake in that it forgets what made the first Ring movie great and instead opts to be a typical and generic horror film. But hey, for some reason Sadako 3D was successful enough so that way they made a Sadako 3D Part 2, and that's the next movie on this list. Sadako 3D 2 came out in 2013, which is a year after Sadako 3D 1 came out. And it's directed by the same guy, Hanabusa Tsutomu. This time headlining the cast is Takimoto Miyori, who stars as Ando Fuko, the sister of Seto Koji's character from Sadako 3D Part 1. And we have young actress Hirasawa Kokoro, who stars as Nagi, and we'll get to her character later. So the story takes place 5 years after the events of Sadako 3D. So basically, spoiler alert, Takanori and Akane have a baby. However, when giving birth, Akane dies. So Takanori is pissed off and he blames Nagi, his daughter, for Akane's death and then basically abandons her and leaves her in the care of his sister. Now Nagi displays a similar story to Sadako's when Sadako was still alive. That she was reviled by everyone else, she was bullied, and she also displays hints of psychic power and rage as if she were Sadako really. That being said, Fuko, who's the main character of the story, eventually learns about the cursed video and Sadako, and then comes to this conclusion that Nagi might be a reincarnation of Sadako. Alright, now some good things about this movie. There were some good performances, especially by the actress who played Nagi. At times she was cute, other times she was absolutely terrifying. Also, Sadako 3D 2 was miles above the first Sadako 3D movie. For a while, it seemed to remember what made the first Ring movies great, and tried to have a similar atmosphere. They stopped using 3D as an overused gimmick, and overall it was a much more enjoyable experience, relatively speaking. But hey, at least it tried, because we got a lot of more bad things to talk about. While Sadako 3D 1 was your typical run-in-the-mill horror movie with jump scares, Sadako 3D 2 was a typical run-in-the-mill scary child movie. The story was no longer about a curse or a cursed video. Though I guess with horror you have to pick your cliches. And it felt like Sadako herself wasn't even in the movie as much. Though in the other Ring movies, arguably she didn't have that much screen time either, but it felt like there was a lot better build-up, so that when she finally comes out you feel like, oh, it's Sadako. However, the way they built her up in this movie, it felt really empty. Even much emptier than how it was in Sadako 3D Part 1. Hell, there wasn't even an actual actress cast as Sadako. I actually think it was just made up purely CG. Though overall the movie was much better than Sadako 3D Part 1, it didn't feel as honest as the original Ring movie. The original Ring movie was smaller in scale, had much more eerie atmosphere, and more emotion when in crafting the plot. However, Sadako 3D Part 2 and 3D Part 1 were your typical cash grab horror movies. Will you be entertained? Yeah. More so than the first one. There were no more spider Sadako, so that was an upgrade. There was a part when some minions randomly came out and killed a guy, but whatever. I think we're beyond reasoning at this point. And that's about it. So the Ring series as a whole, other than the first movie, not all that great. It's one of those instances where the character Sadako has transcended beyond her franchise. Like, we all remember Sadako for her image, but then when you actually go to the movies, not many of them are great. Well, at least the Ring movies aren't like the Ju-on movies, which follow the same exact plot in each movie no matter what. But instead we get an inconsistent portrayal of the character Sadako. I mean, sometimes she's a vengeful ghost, sometimes she's naked and seductive, sometimes she has spider minions. But regardless, either way, I can't wait for the new Sadako vs. Kayako movie. Guys, we all know it's going to be bad, but you know, just like as in Freddy vs. Jason, it's going to be fun just at how ridiculous the whole story is going to be. But hey, what did you think about the Ring movies? Which one was your favorite and which one was your least favorite? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below. Don't forget to give us a like and make sure to subscribe to Asian Filmist for more discussions and reviews on Asian films. And don't forget to sign up for our email newsletter so you can get our free copy of our ebook, The 108 Asian Films to Watch. And also please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Once again, my name is Ray, and I would love to chat with you on Twitter. And that's it, guys. Alright, I'm about to watch another movie. I'll be back soon. Promise.